Manila just announced it's about to patrol contested waters alongside China. It is the same China it's been fighting with for the last 18 months. Just weeks ago, the Philippines signed a military task force with the United States, Canada joined its defense alliance, and American drones were flying surveillance missions overhead. So, which side is Manila actually on? Or is this something far more complicated than a simple betrayal? Let's unpack this. On February 24, 2026, Philippine Senator Erwin Tulfo disclosed something that sent shockwaves through regional security circles. He said the Philippine Coast Guard and China Coast Guard are preparing to sign a formal memorandum of agreement for joint patrols, search and rescue operations, and environmental cleanup in the contested West Philippine Sea. On the surface, it sounds rational, but this announcement comes in an atmosphere of military escalation that would have seemed unimaginable just 24 months ago. Rewind to October 2025. Chinese vessels rammed and damaged a Philippine government ship off Thitu Island. Water cannons were deployed. 2 weeks earlier, a Chinese helicopter buzzed a Philippine patrol plane over Scarborough Shoal, flying within 3 meters, triggering a 30-minute standoff. These aren't diplomatic disagreements. These are physical confrontations between military forces operating in the same stretch of ocean. Yet despite these tensions, Manila is simultaneously operating the most advanced joint military task force Southeast Asia has ever seen with the United States. Manila is flying joint air patrols with American B-1 bombers over the same disputed shoals that Chinese fighters harassed just months earlier. Similarly, Manila is now negotiating cooperation protocols with the same adversary it's been beefing up defenses against. So the real question isn't whether Manila is betraying its Western allies. It's whether Manila is trying to survive in a region where it can't afford to make an enemy of China, and simultaneously can't survive without American support. Let's establish the baseline reality. The Philippines has a military that's been chronically underfunded for decades. Its navy is modest. Its air force operates aging aircraft. In a direct military confrontation with China's People's Liberation Army, there's no universe in which Manila wins. China, by contrast, has the world's largest navy by hull count, advanced Coast Guard vessels purpose-built for ramming, and the resources to sustain operations indefinitely. This is why the United States matters so much. Since 2024, Washington has committed roughly $500 million in military aid to Manila because Washington sees the Philippines as critical to its own Indo-Pacific strategy. In November 2025, the US and Philippines formalized a joint military task force, the first of its kind in Southeast Asia. What does that mean in practical terms? Historically, Philippine military information had to travel back and forth between Manila and the US Pacific Fleet headquarters in Hawaii. That's a cumbersome process with security protocols that added delays. During a crisis, say, a Chinese vessel blocking Philippine resupply boats, those delays could be catastrophic. The new task force allows real-time intelligence sharing. When a Chinese Coast Guard cutter approaches Philippine waters, both militaries see it simultaneously and can coordinate an immediate response. Pentagon planners describe this as re-establishing deterrence, military speak for making China think twice before escalating. Retired Philippine Rear Admiral Jude Ong explained the significance. The task force lets both navies share sensitive intelligence almost in real time, replacing the old system where critical information sat in secure channels and took hours to transmit. It's not just the US. Canada signed its Status of Visiting Forces Agreement with Manila in November 2025, the same month the US formed the Joint Task Force. Japan has a similar agreement. Australia does too. The Philippines is now the hub of a Western military network stretching from North America to the Pacific. French and German defense delegations have visited Manila recently, exploring similar arrangements. The Philippines is becoming the Western Alliance's forward base in Southeast Asia. That costs China geopolitically. Every new Western ally in Manila's orbit represents another voice voting against Beijing in international forums, another military capability that raises the cost of aggressive Chinese action. But here's what Western observers often downplay. The Philippines doesn't have the luxury of treating China like a strategic competitor alone. China is an economic fact of life. China is one of the Philippines' largest trading partners. Thousands of Philippine workers are employed in Chinese-invested projects across Southeast Asia. Filipino seafarers work on Chinese-owned vessels. Construction crews labor on Chinese-backed infrastructure. For many ordinary Filipinos, China represents economic opportunity, not just military threat. Even as Chinese Coast Guard vessels repeatedly rammed and harassed Philippine boats throughout 2024, both governments maintained diplomatic channels. They negotiated the resupply agreement. They made progress on other maritime coordination issues. Why? Because both sides recognized that open conflict served neither interest. Beijing didn't want a shooting war. That would trigger automatic US intervention. Manila didn't want economic retaliation that could devastate its workers and entrepreneurs. So, they engaged in what security analysts call managed confrontation. Aggressive at sea, diplomatic through official channels. The proposed Joint Coast Guard Agreement fits this pattern perfectly. But let's be precise about what such an agreement accomplishes politically. For China, it legitimizes Chinese presence in disputed waters by establishing patrol protocols. It creates a framework where Chinese vessels and Philippine vessels operate together, implicitly treating the area as shared space rather than disputed territory. Every joint patrol is a soft acknowledgement of Chinese claims. For the Philippines, it provides a safety valve. Joint patrols reduce the risk of escalation spiraling into open conflict. It buys political cover domestically. Manila can show its citizens it's engaging China diplomatically, not just militarizing against it. Not all Filipinos support the Western alliance strategy. Some view it as entrapment, binding Manila to American strategic interests at the cost of Filipino blood. Others remember Duterte's pivot to China and ask, why did we turn away from an economic partner? By negotiating Coast Guard cooperation with Beijing, Marcos Jr. signals that he's not simply an American proxy. He's a leader capable of managing both relationships. It's a political hedge against the accusation that he's surrendered Filipino sovereignty to Washington. Here's the insight that resolves the apparent paradox. The Philippines doesn't have to choose between deterrence and accommodation because these serve different functions. Deterrence is about raising the cost of Chinese aggression. The Joint Military Task Force with the U.S., the drone patrols, the carrier strike group exercises. These make military escalation by China riskier and more expensive. They deter attacks on Philippine outposts and shipping. Accommodation is about managing the confrontation when deterrence fails. The Coast Guard Agreement provides procedures for when vessels do encounter each other, for incidents that might otherwise spiral into major crises. Think of it like a company with both security and legal departments. The security team deters crime with visible cameras and patrols. The legal team manages liability if crime happens anyway. Both are necessary. They're not contradictory, they're complementary. The Philippines actually has precedent for this exact strategy. Remember the resupply agreement Manila negotiated with China in July 2024? That agreement emerged after months of violent confrontations around Second Thomas Shoal, where Chinese vessels had rammed Philippine boats. Unable to win militarily, Manila negotiated rules of engagement with Beijing. The agreement stipulated how often the Philippines could resupply its garrison on the shoal, what routes it could use, and protocols to prevent future violence. Did that agreement prevent Chinese harassment? Not entirely. Incidents continued, but the agreement created a baseline understanding. Chinese Coast Guard vessels would allow controlled resupply missions at certain intervals. It stabilized a dangerous situation without requiring the Philippines to abandon its territorial claims. That same agreement was reaffirmed in January 2025, despite ongoing tensions elsewhere in the South China Sea. The risk in this strategy is obvious. The more the Philippines cooperates with China, the more it risks normalizing Chinese presence and claims. Joint patrols could be interpreted as Manila acknowledging Chinese jurisdiction over disputed waters. Economic ties could create dependency that discourages Philippines' resistance to future Chinese pressure. Chinese military analysts are explicitly discussing this. One senior analyst noted that Manila's Western alliances remain symbolically important, but militarily limited. The U.S. and Japan won't involve themselves in major escalations, he argued, so they're essentially pushing the Philippines to fight alone while they provide support from the margins. That's a legitimate concern. The Philippines is far smaller, less developed, and more vulnerable than China. No amount of Western military aid closes that gap overnight. Manila's balancing act only makes sense when you understand the broader regional geometry. The Philippines isn't powerful enough to defy China, but it's too strategically important for the U.S. to abandon. The Pentagon sees the South China Sea as the critical constraint on Chinese power. If Beijing controls that corridor, the world's most important shipping route, it can strangle allied economies and tilt the balance of power irreversibly. That's worth significant investment to prevent. For the Philippines, the calculus is simpler. It's caught between an expansionist power and a protective patron. It has to keep both relationships functioning or face catastrophic choices. You might ask, if China knows the Philippines is backed by the U.S., why does it keep escalating? The answer lies in long-term strategy. China believes the U.S. commitment to the Indo-Pacific is ultimately constrained by American domestic priorities and political will. If Beijing can make the status quo more painful than concession through consistent harassment, economic pressure, and the accumulation of new military facilities, eventually the Philippines might decide accommodation is cheaper than resistance. There's also a Taiwan dimension to this that can't be ignored. The Philippines' strategic value to the U.S. increased dramatically after 2019, when Washington began openly preparing for potential conflict with China over Taiwan. In a Taiwan scenario, the Philippines becomes critical. Its air bases could host U.S. aircraft. Its waters could host American naval assets. Its ports could support logistics. That's why the U.S. is willing to invest so heavily in Philippine military modernization. But it also explains why Manila feels pressure to hedge. If the U.S. and China actually came to blows over Taiwan, the Philippines would be on the front lines, not by choice, but by geography. Maintaining at least nominal working relationships with Beijing is self-preservation. Here's something analysts often miss. The U.S. and its allies should actually prefer this outcome. They want to contain Chinese expansion, not provoke a war they'd have to fight. If Coast Guard protocols and diplomatic agreements can stabilize the South China Sea while preserving Philippine access to disputed territories, that's a strategic win. The danger is if the cooperation deepens to the point where the Philippines becomes reluctant to resist Chinese claims out of fear of rupturing the relationship. That's the red line Washington is watching. Over the next 18 to 24 months, watch three things. 1. The continued Western alliance deepening. More visiting forces agreements, more joint exercises, more equipment transfers. This trend seems solid and bipartisan. Even the Trump administration has continued defense support to the Philippines. 2. Chinese testing of the accommodation framework. How far can Beijing push while still claiming to uphold agreements? This will define the actual boundaries of cooperation. 3. Philippine internal politics. How long can Manila sustain this balancing act domestically? Opposition parties will attack the Western alliance as selling out. Pro-China factions will attack Coast Guard cooperation as Western appeasement. Marcos Jr.'s administration is betting it can manage both messages. The Philippines isn't betraying the West or surrendering to China. It's surviving. And understanding why requires looking past the headline of joint patrols with China and recognizing the deeper game. Managing a confrontation you can't win by fighting alone, but can't afford to lose completely. This is how great power competition works in the real world.